I don't know if you know this, but a rookie running back will finish top 5 next year. So 2022 is ending, and it's hard not to look ahead to 2023. These are my top 7 early predictions for the 2023 season. Let's discuss. And it begins with a new incoming rookie, Bijan Robinson out of the University of Texas, projected to be a first-round pick, potentially even a top 20 pick. Robinson has it all. The elite size, 225 pounds, speed, combination, can catch passes. He's going to be the best prospect since Saquon Barkley. I mean, look at what this dude did in 2020 as an 18-year-old in college football. He ended up putting up 703 rushing yards. When you add in his receiving yards, 900 total yards as an 18-year-old in a Power 5 conference. He then went on to have a great sophomore year, and this past year in 2022, over 1,500 rushing yards. When you combined his 300 receiving yards, 1,900 total yards. Now, of course, this depends where he lands, and let's see where the experts are expecting him to go. According to Mock Draftable, which is fantastic for player prospects and just NFL draft boards in general, he's expected on average, according to these experts, to go 14th overall, all the draft consensus, and a lot of people are expecting him more times than not to go to the Buccaneers. Now, outside of the Bucs, the Bills and the Ravens are also a popular choice, and if he landed with any of these teams, yeah, he would be a fantastic fantasy option and definitely finishes a top 5 RB. Now, specifically for the Ravens, you might say, yeah, but J.K. Dobbins is there. Well, J.K. Dobbins is a former second-round pick now. He is somebody who is not nearly as talented, in my opinion, as a Bijan Robinson. He's a good back, but he would not be the lead back if Bijan was selected here. Now, some people might push back, and this is something you always get, especially from more inexperienced players. Oh, I'm not drafting a running back who's a rookie with my first pick. Well, let's go through the past running backs who were rookies. You have Ezekiel Elliott, his rookie year, finishing 3rd overall. Saquon Barkley in his rookie year finished 3rd overall. Then there was Leonard Fournette, who had a bad year, quote-unquote bad year for a rookie running back. Oh yeah, 7th overall. And we can keep going. Najee Harris was 6th overall. Jonathan Taylor was 8th overall. The only guy who really didn't get there recently was Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And he was selected by Patrick Mahomes. Yes, Andy Reid asked Patrick Mahomes who he wants, so a quarterback selected him with the last pick in the 1st round, and he wasn't even that great of a prospect. I mean, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was expected to go in the 3rd round. Mahomes just ended up seeing the championship game in college football that year and was like, yeah, I want that guy. So you can feel confident taking Bijan Robinson, and my prediction is that he finishes as a top 5 fantasy running back, assuming he goes to a decent landing spot. So if he's in the top 5, who is going to be number 1 overall? Well, I think we're going to have a new number 1 overall running back this year. It's not going to be your Jonathan Taylor. It's not going to be your Christian McCaffrey. It's not going to be your Derrick Henry or Saquon Barkley. In 2023, Ramondre Stevenson will be the number 1 overall running back. Stevenson has proven that he's an elite 3-down running back, and Damian Harris is expected to leave in free agency. And now this is what Stevenson has done in 11 games as a starter. He didn't start until week 3, missed some time with injury. He averages 18.1 fantasy points per game, over 4 receptions per game, and 102 total yards per game when you factor in his rushing and receiving yards. So that 18.1 fantasy points per game, where would that rank over an entire season this year? Well, these are the only 5 running backs averaging more than 18 fantasy points per game. Eckler, CMC, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, and Saquon Barkley. That's how good Stevenson has been. And not to mention, Ramondre is in a bad offense. This is, by all accounts, a bottom 10 passing offense, and in general, outside of Ramondre Stevenson, a bottom 10 rush offense. The Patriots offensive line ranks 24th in run blocking out of 32 teams. That's not good, but Ramondre still ranks 6th in yards created. So even with a bad offensive line, he's creating his own yards, meaning he's breaking tackles and getting yards after contact. Imagine if he had a decent offensive line. And imagine if he had a decent offense, because this dude is a walking cheat code. The fantasy cheat codes are your targets and red zone touches. He's 3rd in running back targets, and he's 18th in red zone touches, but keep in mind, since he's been a starter in week 3 and not factoring in his injured games, he's actually top 10 in red zone touches. So expect more red zone work, as the offense can only get better heading into next year, hopefully with a new offensive coordinator and a better offensive line. Stevenson will be the number 1 overall running back. So those are a couple of running back predictions. Let's talk wide receiver, and a name you might have forgotten about. And that name is Calvin Ridley. Remember him? The man who was suspended for an entire year because he was sports betting a couple $100. I mean, come on now. Anyways, I mean, if you ask me personally, I think it's a little bit silly how harsh the punishment was compared to some other things the NFL has done, but he did break the rules. Now, the last time we saw Ridley play a full season was 2020, the year where he saw 143 targets and was 4th overall in fantasy, by far his best finish. And in this year, he silenced a lot of doubters. A lot of people said this guy can't get separation. Well, he was 7th in yards per route run and top 10 in separation. And those cheat codes at the wide receiver position, the deep targets and the red zone targets, he was a walking cheat code, led all wide receivers with a whopping 40 deep targets and 2nd in red zone targets. Now, he did all this despite Matt Ryan ranking 19th in quarterback efficiency, and now you know what happens next in 2021. This is a tweet from Calvin Ridley himself, who ended up stepping away from football in 2020 for his mental health reasons, and he only played 5 total games in that year. Now, a lot of people just remember the sour taste in him not converting earlier in the year, but the usage for this guy and his overall skill set at remaining to be an an elite wide receiver and getting separation was still there. He was averaging 10.4 targets per game, had 17 cheat code targets, and was third against man coverage. Still absolutely elite at getting open. But the question now becomes, is he still going to be this good 20 months later? And it's a fair question, especially considering he's now 28 years old and he just missed a large chunk of his prime. Now, there's no doubt we would rather have this guy be younger, but at 28, he's still fine, especially as an efficient, good route runner. Just ask guys like Keenan Allen, Stephon Diggs, and Devonte Adams. Guys approaching their 30s or in their 30s are still real efficient. Okay, so now Ridley's on the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he's going to play with Trevor Lawrence, who is likely the best quarterback he's ever played with, including Matt Ryan. Because this year, Lawrence is breaking out. He's arguably a top 5 quarterback, definitely a top 10 quarterback this year, whether it's in overall passing stats like passing yards or his overall accuracy. And again, the Jaguars traded for him. They went out of their way to get him, and they knew he would miss this year. They're incentivized to play him. And this is the exact trade details. There's 2 picks on the line. Now, it depends how long Ridley plays with the team. Does he sign a contract? How many games does he play? On which rounds the picks will be. But it's going to be 2 picks, either a 4th and a 5th, all the way up to potentially a 2nd round pick if they re-sign Calvin Ridley. And not only that, but Evan Ingram and Marvin Jones are going to be free agents. Odds are Marvin Jones is walking away, and Evan Ingram after this year is probably going to command a high price. He might even walk away. My guess is that Ridley slides in as the 1A, 1B with Christian Kirk and finishes as a top 15 wide receiver. Okay, so now we go to the tight end position, and there's Kyle Pitts. Before we get to the prediction, let's discuss his disappointing season. Kyle Pitts was taken as a top 32 pick, a 3rd round pick in many drafts this past year. And he let a lot of people down, finishing as the tight end 20 before he ended up getting injured and missing the season. But Pitts was still good. You see, despite finishing as the tight end 20, he was 4th in tight end efficiency, and he overall finished 1st, not only amongst tight ends, but all players in target rate. Your target rate is how often you get targeted per route run. So how good you are at getting open, how much you're involved in the game plan, so on and so on. So Pitts himself was still elite, but his quarterback, his overall offense, and how often they got in the red zone weren't elite. You see, Pitts averaged less than 6 targets per game and only had 2 touchdowns. He played in an offense that threw less than 24 times per game, 2nd lowest in the league, only to Chicago. But both of these teams were seeing historic lows this past year. And he played with Marcus Mariota, who ranked 29th in quarterback accuracy, arguably the worst quarterback this year. So much so that, as you can see my tweet right here, 41% of Kyle Pitts' targets were uncatchable. Most of the time, it'll be like 15 or 20% for a tight end or a wide receiver. 41% is absolutely abysmal. He had no chance of catching these balls. But we can safely assume that Mariota won't be the quarterback next year, and just naturally, this team is going to have to pass more. I'd consider last year's performance rock bottom for Kyle Pitts. He was still great. Assuming he recovers from this injury and there's no setbacks, I think he's going to be a top 3 tight end. And then I want to talk about the now rookie and the next year's 2nd round running back, James Cook from the Bills. I believe out of every player in 2023, James Cook will be the league winner. Now, here's what this means. It means he'll be on the most fantasy championship rosters, but there's one disclaimer. If Bijan Robinson goes to the Bills somehow and falls to pick 30, then I take this all back. But if he doesn't, it looks good for James Cook. Look, Devin Singletary is going to be a free agent, and honestly, they have no reason to be re-signing Devin Singletary. He's as average of a player as it gets. Average size, if not below average, at 203 pounds. Well below average in terms of his speed, his burst, his agility. All of these bars below 50% is not good. And he ranks outside the top 50 in efficiency since entering the NFL. There's no reason at all, unless he's absolutely dirt cheap, to re-sign this guy. After all, the Bills did just draft James Cook last year in the 2nd round, with the thought process probably being, Devin Singletary only has 1 year left. And as my tweet points out, James Cook is number 2 in yards per touch this season. He's been every single bit and more that they wanted out of this productive and explosive rookie. And unlike Devin Singletary, he has elite speed and better bursts than Singletary, as you can see right here. 79th percentile, top 20% speed, and a top 6% 40 time of all time. Now, it is worth mentioning that the Bills did trade for Nyheim Hines, but Hines has an out after this year, and there will be a $0 dead cap hit. So there's a real chance they could cut Nyheim Hines if they wanted to. His salary's not all that expensive, but they can cut him and go with somebody cheaper, or draft a backup running back if they wanted to. Now, the biggest things for James Cook, one, we discussed earlier, not drafting Bijan Robinson, and the second thing is avoiding the free agency running backs. And this free agent running back class is elite. Josh Jacobs, Saquon, Miles Sanders, Tony Pollard, right? We can scroll down, you can find some other guys as you go down here. Devin Singletary himself, David Montgomery, Kareem Hunt. The goal is to somehow avoid all those guys. Now, most of them will re-sign with their teams for either a fair deal or maybe slightly above average, but there's a chance a guy like Kareem Hunt ends up on the Bills, and if that's the case, it is worrisome for Cook. We have to avoid that. Honestly, Devin Singletary re-signing might be his best bet because Singletary isn't a threat. Okay, so James Cook, the league winner. Now, what about Javonte Williams? Is he somebody we want to be targeting off of his injury? What is my prediction for him? Well, let's discuss this injury. Javonte was being taken on average, this is his average draft position, as a top 25 pick for the 2022 fantasy fantasy season. And he started the season off great, 20 plus points, 6 yards per carry on the ground, but the big thing, 11 catches on 12 targets in Russell Wilson's first game as a Bronco. But after that game, his next 3 games were all below 10 points, including that 4th game where he ended up tearing his ACL. Now, the average time to recover for an ACL tear for a running back in the NFL right now is 9 to 12 months. Since Devonte is younger, you would think this pushes him towards 9 months, and he should be ready for the start of the season, right? Oh, no, because it wasn't just his ACL, unfortunately, that he tore. He also tore his LCL and his PLC. This damage makes it take a longer time for the knee to recover, even in younger running backs. And as Sports MD Analysis on Twitter points out, he points out the 3 things that ended up being injured here in that knee. It's similar to J.K. Dobbins' injury, who Dobbins was able to recover in a somewhat record-setting 13 months, even though the average it takes is 15 months. So there's a chance you don't see Javonte Williams at all next year. And even if he's back early enough, he's not going to be back until sometime in mid-October, which means he'll miss 4 to 6 weeks at best for you. And as Sports MD Analysis points out also in this tweet, there's normally an average of a 20% performance dip in terms of yardage, in terms of efficiency per touch, fantasy production, when they're healthy. So to summarize all this for you, you're not going to see Javonte at best for 4 to 6 weeks. There's a chance you don't see him for maybe even 10 to 12 weeks, and when he's back, he'll be only 80% of himself. So my prediction for 2023 is no matter where Javonte Williams is drafted, he will not pay off his price tag. Just avoid injured players as a rule of thumb. That includes Devonte Williams. Now, what about Devonte Adams, who has been a top 12 wide receiver every year since 2015? What is my prediction for him? Well, let's discuss. Look, this year has been absolutely elite for Adams. Over 15 games, he has 160 targets. He's 10 targets away right now from a career high. Now, despite this high volume and his 12 touchdowns, his 19.3 points per game is his lowest since 2019. So why is this? Well, I dug in a little bit and here's what I found. His receptions are down a little bit right now. He might not even break 100 receptions this year. It's still a great reception total, but for his metrics, it's not as good. But more importantly, his yards per route run have decreased. And it's kind of hard to notice at first because he's still a top 10 efficiency wide receiver, but he's been top 5 the last 5 years and top 3 the last 2. Now, Adams just turned 30 years old on Christmas Eve, and historically, you're going to see your production drop by about 20% in efficiency each year as a 30-year-old wide receiver. Now, of course, Devonte Adams is well above average, so he might not get hit the same way, and I don't think he's going to have a terrible year this next year. I just don't think he's going to finish top 12. Now, not only is he getting older and he's not in as ideal of a situation, but Derek Carr is a potential out this year, and there's a really good chance a guy like Derek Carr is going to be traded and will command at least 1 first-round pick from some team out there. So that would be bad if that happened, and even if it didn't, Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller were out for most of this year. They're both under contract for next year, so when they're back in, it will reduce Adams' target share. So expect another 1,000-yard year for Adams, but I don't expect him to finish top 12 for the first time since 2015. Okay, next up, you see Treylon Burks on the screen, and this is a little bonus one for you. This would be our number 8 prediction. The 7 key wide receivers from this past year, and those 7 wide receivers are Christian Watson, Treylon Burks, Drake London, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jahan Dotson, and George Pickens. My prediction is that all 7 of those wide receivers finish top 25. Now, the ones that are a little bit sketchy start with guys like Treylon Burks, but Burks has played legit starter snaps in 3 games this year as a rookie. The first one didn't go as well, but it was only his 3rd career game, 3 points. The other 2, he ended up scoring 18 points, top 12, and 17 points, top 20. And now Nick Westbrook is a free agent, so he'll be a clear starter next year. Then there's Jahan Dotson, who has played in 8 healthy games. And in 6 of these games, if you scroll through his game logs, he's finished as a top 25 wide receiver in 6 out of his 8 healthy games. And he's coming on a lot right now, top 10 over the last 3 weeks. And there's a decent chance a quarterback goes to Washington next year, whether it's in the draft or they trade for one like a Derek Carr. And then the last guy who might be difficult to see being a top 25 wide receiver is George Pickens. Now, a lot of this is just a pure bet on talent and Kenny Pickett getting better. But there's also a highly likely chance that Matt Canada, the offensive coordinator in Pittsburgh, is one of the first coaches fired once the season ends. And it's worth mentioning Deontay Johnson does have an out in his contract, but given his dead cap hit of nearly $20 million, odds are this does not come true. He doesn't leave the team. But Pickens, pure talent with another year in the system for Kenny Pickett, and likely, just by pure default, a better offensive coordinator. I think he's a top 25 wide receiver with the rest of those guys we mentioned. Now, if you enjoyed this video and want to get early access to the 2023 fantasy cheat sheet, well, check the link in the description below to get all signed up and ready for it to drop.